It all depends on Jalen Hurts. I think their plan is for Jalen Hurts to be a lot better in the passing game this year. And if he isn't, then they'll go elsewhere in 2023. If there's going to be a year where there's going to be a linebacker in that mix somehow, maybe not the first round, but certainly the second, this should be the year.
Got your MAGA Mac guys here on Birds 365, McMullen and McDonald. And adjusting his camera, joining us is none other than Les Bowen from NJ.com. Les, you look relaxed. Are you ready to cover the Eagles for the 2022 season?
Oh, absolutely. Any minute now, yes.
Yeah, and Howie was surprised to see Les. He wrote him a thank you note and all that good stuff when last... No, they never retired. I don't know why they're blaming you, Les.
Well, I kind of did retire. I mean, I'm not working every day on the beat like I was, but yeah, Howie wants his football back.
Wants his football back.
Yeah.
Wants his game ball back.
I told him Brady did it, so
that was a good line, Les. So we had a little bit of fun. Les working these days, as you mentioned, for NJ.com. Wrote a piece about Brandon Brown and Ian Cunningham, so I want to talk to you about that. But before we get there, you were hanging on during the break in the green room. I don't know if you heard Jody and I, but when Howie was talking about the wide receiver spike in salaries and kind of saying, we want to, we don't want to follow the crowd. We want to be the leaders. How did you take that as somebody who's been around this organization for as long as you have?
Yeah, I kind of took it the way you did, John. The Eagles over the years, for better or worse, and sometimes it's worse, they really do keep a finger in the air as far as trends and inefficiencies they can exploit and things like that. You had Chip Kelly in sports science, which in some ways was they've done, they kept some of that stuff that Chip did, even though some of it was, they're no longer measuring the femurs of prospects at the Senior Bowl and stuff, are making guys sleep in masks, but some of it was very useful. They still have the individualized smoothies, and they still have a very, Chip brought in a bunch of people that, attend to, it makes a lot of sense to have a lot of people involved in the medical side of keeping guys healthy and productive and stuff like that. So, yeah, I didn't, that wasn't one of my main takeaways from yesterday, really, frankly. I think this whole thing with the salaries is very interesting with the wide receivers because it comes at a time you're looking at a really good wide receiver draft. So the question for a lot of these teams is, like, let's say Deebo Samuel is actually available, for trade. He wants to be traded. If you can draft one of the top 2 or 3 receivers in this draft and have him at an entry-level contract for 4 years, would you rather have that at 15 or would you rather have Deebo Samuel? And that might be, or at 10 if you're the Jets, that's an interesting question to me. It's the wide receiver thing has busted wide open. The Christian Kirk contract, I think it was clear that it just took the rest of the NFL. It was one of those moments where people just sort of, look at their phone like, what? The wide receiver position is getting a lot of notice, but it's also, it kind of highlights the disparity. This deal that the players signed off on in 2011 with the entry level 4 years really makes it much more beneficial to have guys at that really good players in that scale than it does signing guys for market level deals, at least until the cap goes way up next year, which is supposed to do.
All right. So since we went to wide receivers, let me follow up there. Devontae Adams got the big payday he got when he got traded. Tyreek Hill got the big payday that he got when he got traded. Christian Kirk got the incomprehensible payday that he got via free agency. And all of the guys did it. Well, we know Christian Kirk did it for the money. The other two guys did it because they forced a trade. When is Devonta Smith going to say, I no longer want to be a Philadelphia Eagle because we don't throw the football. We run the football here in Philadelphia. It seems like a bunch of potential moves that the Eagles made this year were thwarted because, well, why would a wide receiver really want to come here? Because we've set our identity the second half of last year as a running team, so we don't profile as someone who will allow a player to put up numbers. When it's Devonta go, hey, I want to get the hell out of Dodge before I become a middle-of-the-road receiver and put up mediocre numbers and can't command a Devontae Smith, Tyreek Hill type payday?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think we're on that. I don't think that we're there yet, but it all depends on Jalen Hurts. I think their plan is for Jalen Hurts to be a lot better in the passing game this year. And if he isn't, then they'll go elsewhere in 2023 for a rookie, that they draft or try to find a quarterback somehow. I don't think in the long run they're going to be a run-based team. I don't see that as a way that you win the Super Bowl in this era. But right now, yeah, I'm sure there's a little you see all these lists of great receivers and so forth and great young receivers, and sometimes you don't see Devontae Smith on there. And it isn't because he isn't as good as those players. It's because he didn't really have the numbers as a rookie. And I'm sure there's a tiny part of his brain that, processes that. But right now, I don't think that's a big concern coming off his rookie season. I think he likes Jalen Hurts. They know each other very, very well. They were college teammates briefly. I think he's on board with trying to make Jalen Hurts a better passer and, get those numbers up a little bit.
All right, Les, so let's mesh those two together. Quarterback Jalen Hurts, the receiving issues this team has had for a number of years that date back pre-Nick Sirianni, obviously. They've gone, when you talk about the cost-effective route, the 2011 CBA, they've gone wide receiver at the top of the draft with JJ and then Jalen Reagor. And finally, they got it right with Devontae Smith. Now they might have to take another swing at the top of the draft for the reasons you talked about, among them. And then you have the quarterback. So I always look at teams, and you know this, Les, they say one thing in front of the microphone, they do another thing behind the microphone. To me, the Eagles, look, they went after Christian Kirk until the number got too high. Then they shifted to Allen Robinson, and he wanted to go to play for the Super Bowl champions, which is understandable. They tried to trade for Calvin Ridley. We know what happened there. They wanted to get in with Robert Woods. He wanted to go to Nashville for whatever reason. So you have all these veteran receivers they wanted to get. They wanted to get one of them. So that tells me that was plan A, veteran receiver. And now they got to shift to plan B, another young receiver where Devontae Smith and even Quez Watkins have to mentor them instead of being mentored.
Yes.
Do you think that's helpful to Jalen Hurts and his development?
Yeah, that's a real concern, John. That clearly was their plan. And that would have made so much sense to have a veteran receiver in that group, a really good veteran receiver who could kind of lead the group. That was the plan going into the offseason. It seemed like a pretty viable plan. But then, there's the guys you mentioned. There's guys like Chris Godwin signing with their original teams. It just didn't the market didn't turn out to be what they'd anticipated. And it is not a good situation to be looking at the draft, looking at spending a first-round pick on a wide receiver. You look at their defense, and the best players on that defense, which isn't a real good defense, are over 30. They are in a position where they've devoted so many resources to wide receiver in particular. I think I wrote a thing about this recently. Let's see if my memory is decent, but I think since 2015, 5 first or second round picks have gone to the wide receiver position, which is extraordinary. I mean, you can obviously the first guy in that list would be Nelson Aguilar, who wasn't a horrendous bust, but if Nelson Aguilar were, a top all-pro receiver on his second contract now, they never would have done a lot of the other things they had to do.
It's sort of a butterfly effect. You keep going down the same route.
Yes. You can't just keep doing this year after year after year without it really hurting the rest of your team. This is what happened with, Matt Millen in the Detroit Lions, where he kept drafting wide receivers. It's not a great position to be in, even though this is a good wide receiver draft. And if they do have to take one at 15 or 18, they can certainly find one that will be a good player, but that's not really the nub of the issue, as you pointed out. This is not the process that they need. They need to spend those picks on defense, assuming you don't want to force stuff, but assuming there are good players, defensive players available at 15 and 18, and they need to have a veteran presence in the wide receiver room and somebody who can really play, not some guy who's basically a special teams player who gets on the field for 4 or 5 snaps a game. It's got to be, somebody who's going to be a leader of that group on and off the field. And they're not going to have that this year, it looks like.
Here's the good news. If you put J.J. Arcega-Whiteside as a second-round pick into the mix, if the Eagles are going down the Lions road again, 4th time's a charm. The 4th one was Megatron, Calvin Johnson. So that's who's coming to Philadelphia here this year in the draft, if it plays to the Lions' way of doing things.
That means Jody wants Drake London.
Yeah.
Which I know is not the case.
Yeah, not the case.
No, I don't. USC wide receivers, not just Aguilar, but, I've seen a lot of USC wide receivers for whatever reason just not live up to.
Keyshawn's coming to get you, Les.
Yeah, that was a very long time ago.
Yeah. Damn. I was going to go Lynn Swan. If Keyshawn's a very long time ago, I'm going way too far back.
Yeah.
All right, Les, I want to get your feeling on the fact that I don't know how comforted you are, but I was to know that the Eagles are just fine at safety because they've got Kayvon Wallace and Andre Sachere, as per Howie yesterday, that they've got a lot of depth at the safety position already on the roster. I get it. He's not tipping his hand. He doesn't want to tip his hand.
Right.
Does this tell you that even if Kyle Hamilton falls down the board to 15, the Eagles aren't going safety?
No. If Kyle Hamilton is there at 15, I can't imagine that they won't take Kyle Hamilton.
Okay, hope so.
I think what's going on here is you've got Honey Badger still sitting out there in free agency. The possibility now, the talk that Kyle Hamilton might drop because of positional value or his 40 time or whatever kind of gives them pause. You don't want to sign Honey Badger and then draft Kyle Hamilton. You don't need both of those guys to play the same position. So I think what happens is you get to the draft, and if you don't get Kyle Hamilton, then maybe you have Honey Badger or something like him in your back pocket, to address that position. I think they'll do something, beyond bringing back Harris, which they've already done. It would be interesting. I don't know when they've ever drafted a safety in the first round. Was Bill Bradley a first-round pick?
No, they've never drafted a first-round safety. Never.
Even Brian Dawkins, obviously, was not a first-round draft pick. But it's an important position these days. I don't know. One of the things here is we don't know a lot about, even though we saw a season of Jonathan Gannon, we're not really sure yet because he was playing mostly with the guys that he inherited from Jim Schwartz. So this defense was constructed around Jim Schwartz's preferences, and we don't really know what Gannon wants. If he values the safety position, obviously Schwartz valued it a lot because they had, Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod, and a few years ago that was as good a duo as you had in the league. They don't have either one of those guys now. So, is it a big deal to Jonathan Gannon, or would he rather have really good linebackers? We just don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I think we'll find out a little bit from this draft about that.
Yeah, it was interesting because Howie went on that kind of tangent, Les, and he brought up Jim and how much he valued safeties, which kind of, I don't know if you took it, but that meant that Jonathan doesn't value safeties as much as Jim. I don't know if that's what he was trying to say, but that's certainly how it came across. On the other hand, they wanted to sign Marcus Williams until they got priced out of that range as well. So it's kind of one of those actions versus words, I guess, theme I was talking about. And that's where I want to shift with you now, because you wrote about this on NJ.com. Not high profile, but the Eagles lost 2 of their top 3 scouts in the offseason, Ian Cunningham and Brandon Brown. It's a bigger deal than I think people realize. And by the way, Andy Weidel might be the GM of the Pittsburgh Steelers after the draft. And then
I would have loved to have been able to ask about that yesterday as well.
Yeah. And Andy was sick. And he's usually at these things. But you have to keep an eye on that after the draft as well. But how do you think the team is handling this? Is it a bigger deal than people realize to lose those guys in the pre-draft process?
Yeah, John, I don't think it's just losing them. It's losing them to NFC teams that you're competing against. One team in your division, Brandon Brown, is with the Giants. I think it's a ridiculous situation. I mean, it's like Dr. Strangelove, with these teams. I always think about, that scene of he'll see the big board, and that's exactly what the NFL is like.
He's seen the big board, yeah.
Brandon Brown and Ian Cunningham have seen the big board.
Yeah.
And Howie's answer to me yesterday was, well, we didn't have the final board quite set when they left. And, the coaches hadn't gotten in there and, established their priorities yet. No, that's icing on the cake. I mean, it should be. I think one of the problems with Chip Kelly was that the coaches had too much draft influence. Coaches aren't scouts. They don't spend the entire season on the road. They don't do research on campuses. They don't go talk to, bouncers at the college bars and dorm advisors and people that really know these guys. They see some film, they watch a game and say, oh, look at that guy. No. I mean, coaches can tell you what type of player fits their system, but coaches don't dramatically change your draft process. They certainly shouldn't, in terms of who you prefer, who's a better player than that guy, or who is more of a character guy than that guy. I think it's a huge problem for them in this draft. I don't think it'll be a great problem for them going forward, but they went to the NFL meetings and got a rule passed where from henceforth, if you're not going to be named the GM somewhere else, you have to have permission from your team if you're going to move before the draft. And I don't remember, maybe John, you have a better memory for the league sometimes than I do. Guys that have left here and come here over the years, I don't remember it being before the draft.
No, it's after. Yeah.
Joe Douglas came here after the Bears draft, and he wasn't the Bears GM.
Well, GMs get hired, in January, just like coaches. But secondary football executives, their contracts run May to May. So that's how they set it up. So their year is draft to draft. And that's when you'll see the Eagles update their personnel department. It'll come in May. after the draft, because that's
you
when
see
the contracts
scouts move around in May. You don't see
Yes.
scouts move around in February.
No.
No. I was amazed that this happened, and I'm not sure why it did. But to me, that's a huge problem for them in this draft, that these guys will make moves knowing, Howie wants to do X, and that's, wow, that is, to me, just amazing.
Les, oh, by the way, Andy Weidel sick yesterday. That's why he wasn't up there. Iron City flu, perhaps? Who knows?
That's another thing, man. I've seen Jerry Dulac, who covers the Steelers, has called Andy the front runner for the Steelers GM job. Now, Andy's going to be here for the draft, obviously, but is he going to have one foot out the door while he's drafting these players? And if he does leave, not so much about this draft, but now your whole personnel department has left in the space of a few months.
Yeah.
That would seem to be a hell of a thing to me. That's
Jeff Lurie told us last year they had 6 or 7 guys who are eventually going to become.
Yeah. Hey, you got to give Jeffrey credit on that one. He's right.
Yeah.
The rest of the league.
Well, we're going to see how deep that bench is, I guess.
Exactly. The guys moving up quickly up the bench of the Eagle executives and scouts. All right. Wanted to get your take on this, Les. Yesterday, Howie did his best tap dance routine around a lot of issues. He got a little expansive in describing what a linebacker can do for an NFL defense these days. Off ball, on ball, in the passing game, ability to cover out of the backfield. Maybe more so than any other position that he was asked about. He decided to give his insight as to what a draftable linebacker looks like these days in the National Football League. Just top of mind stuff. Was he tipping his hand a little bit that the Eagles are interested in linebacker in this draft? Or was this a case of classic misinformation? Let me lead him down the linebacker path because, let's be honest, we just don't put a big value on linebackers here in Philadelphia. Would you read on the fact that he gave you more insight and info on linebacker than maybe any other position you talked about yesterday?
Well, I put a lot of weight in what he said about different defensive coordinators having different positions that they really value. And I think maybe Jonathan Gannon values linebackers a little more than the last few defensive coordinators we've had here. Well, again, we don't really know that, but he comes from the Colts where they do have, Darius Leonard. It seems likely that, I'll put it this way, given that they have 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick, if there's going to be a year where there's going to be a linebacker in that mix somehow, maybe not the first round, but certainly the second, this should be the year. I mean, it really kind of lines up with need. They just don't have elite talent there. And they did sign a good free agent, but on a 1-year deal. They are in what they call a building phase of their defense. And it just seems like, I kind of look for it, but I also know last year going to the draft, the one thing I thought I knew was that they draft a corner in the first 2 or 3 rounds, and it was 4th round before they got around to drafting a corner. And I'm still kind of surprised and puzzled by that. But I do think there's an excellent chance this year. I think it lines up pretty well. There's several guys that people talk about. I believe they might have had Nakobe Dean in there yesterday for a visit from Georgia. I think this could be the year that either first or second round. I mean, they've gone second round for a linebacker before, but not in 10 years since Michael Kendricks. I think you could see one of those picks go to a linebacker, certainly.
All right, Jerry Robinson, you're on alert from Les Bowen, 1979. We'll see if it happens.
I did that story once for the Daily News. I called up Jerry and said, hey, it's been six number of years since you were the last. And he was like, nah, Come on.
And by the way, the ironic part is Jerry was a really good player. He was like
Yes.
a two-time All-Pro. So you would think that would steer him more towards, and obviously that goes way past even
Of course, Jerry
Lloyd.
had played for the Eagles coach, Dick
Yeah.
Vermeil, in
He's a
college. So that was
UCLA
one
guy, yeah. Injuries, Les, because you talk about linebackers being logical. The Eagles have a lot of history with taking injured players recently. It worked with Landon Dickerson last year. It did not work with Sidney Jones a couple years ago. This year, you have Jamison Williams at a position of need, coming off a torn ACL in the national championship game. You have David Ojabo at a position of need, coming off a torn Achilles at his pro day. Same exact thing that happened to Sidney, by the way. How do you think the Eagles handle these things? And I want to marry this to the offseason work as well, because Nick Sirianni got asked about that. Eagles are one of two teams not having mandatory minicamp. They're coming in a week later than you're allowed. Is this purely medical decisions, Dr. Arshdenota, or do Howie and Nick Sirianni put their thumbs into this? Because I don't get the feeling this is Nick's decision. I've yet to meet the football coach that doesn't want to practice.
Right. Yeah, I'm a little surprised by that part of it, John. It's certainly they did have better injury luck last season. You could argue that they were just due, that it was the law of averages, that they'd had so many ridiculous years of, 4 and 5 guys at this position or that position, corner, off offensive line, getting hurt, that they were just due for a good year. But they are forfeiting a lot of time that could be spent on the field. And, I can't imagine that's really optimal in terms of getting your team ready to play. But the whole medical thing, Williams has an ACL. Yeah. And if that's all there is to it, if it's not like a multi-ligament injury, then I'd be pretty confident taking him and figuring you're going to have him in October or November at worst, full strength, and he's probably not going to have, huge problems with that going forward. Achilles, a little different, as we learned with Sidney Jones. Achilles pro day, Sidney's agent, I remember this very, very well, was insisting, he could be ready. Yeah, he's really far along in his rehab. He could play, And Sidney ended up getting in one game, I think, at the end.
Yeah, it was week 17. I think it was.
And it was a lost year for him, and it kind of put him on a bad path. He had a really spindly frame, still has it, I guess, out there in Seattle, with really skinny legs, and he kept getting leg injuries, hamstrings. Curiously enough, I don't think he had as many of those out in Seattle last year, and got a contract with them. Apparently played pretty well. He's not a terrible player. He had really bad injury luck. I think his confidence dropped. I think Schwartz didn't like him for whatever reason, personality-wise. There was a lot going on there. I'm not sure I would want the Achilles guy, Ojabo. I think they really, unless you're just willing to write off 2022 and have this guy come in 2023, realistically, rather than do what they did with Sidney Jones and have people waiting for something that isn't going to happen and make him sort of a disappointment right out of the gate, which I think is what happened with Sidney Jones because he couldn't play that year. I think you have to be really careful with stuff like that. And you have to be really careful with Achilles because it's a big injury in terms of explosiveness. And I don't think medicine has gotten as far as it has with ACLs. ACLs 30, 40 years ago were like, oh my God, career-ending injuries. They aren't anymore. Achilles aren't career-ending injuries, but they're career-affecting injuries for a lot of guys.
Yeah.
More than people really realize. And I'd be more leery of the pass rusher with the Achilles than the wide receiver with the ACL, if that makes any sense.
All right, Les, one of your compatriots, yours and John's, down the Eagles' beaten path, if you get my drift. Brandon Lee Gouton jumped aboard with us earlier this week. And in speaking about Jalen Reagor, he said, does not belong on the team, doesn't go 100%. How can you have a guy like this here? Howie Roseman yesterday, speaking about Jalen Reagor, said, hey, he's busting his butt every day to get better. Couldn't have more diametrically opposite opinions on the particular player. Now, the Eagles have a reason to spin it a specific way, but they have the up-close and personal look. A guy like BLG is looking from afar, on the outside looking in. Doesn't mean you can't be right, just means you don't have as much hands-on information as the team does. Who's closer to being right?
Well, I'm not down there like Brandon. I don't really know, but I don't really expect any great renaissance from Jalen Reagor this season. Obviously, Howie is the guy that drafted Jalen Reagor in the first round over Justin Jefferson, and he's got to try to make that look as palatable as he can. You know, it's just, Reagor still has talent, and I think that part of it is true, but he just hasn't put it together. You don't see the results of any kind of work on the field. You don't see consistency. You don't see, great route running. Has something changed this offseason? I don't know. I guess when the team gets together, maybe we'll be able to tell that a little bit from watching, but maybe he's remade his body. I have no clue, but at this point, he was just awful last year, and it was his second year, and we all know how he's reacted to fan criticism, media criticism. It hasn't been with resolve. It's been with petulance. And I probably think Brandon's probably a lot closer to being right here than how he is. Be a heck of a story if Jalen Reagor turned it around and became a productive player, but I just don't see it at this point.
All right, Les, want to end it with you here with a productive player. Before that, follow Les on Twitter at Les Bowen. You can read him these days at NJ.com with our buddy Chris Franklin as well, their Eagles coverage. Brandon Graham, another Michigan pass rusher who's 34, coming off an Achilles injury, which, as you mentioned, can be a career-affecting injury. Can we expect the normal Brandon Graham coming back at that age from that type of injury? Brandon was on with us here on JAKIB Media this week, said he wants to play 15 years. That's 3 more years, Les. Now, if anybody can do it, it's Brandon. Right. But, boy, that's a tough injury at that age, wouldn't you think?
Yes. Yes, it is. I certainly am pulling for the guy. He's one of the most memorable players I've ever covered. Really sterling person on and off the field, leader, did a lot to win a Super Bowl for the Eagles. Everybody knows that. Had a terrible, if you remember his draft and what happened a few years after that, it was almost the same as Jalen Reagor. They took him instead of Earl Thomas, and the whole city was ready to, burn down the stadium for years. I mean, he had a terrible knee injury. It was actually a bigger injury than we knew at the time. He had microfracture surgery, which 10 years ago was a pretty big deal. And the defensive line coach, Jim Washburn, didn't want to play him. And it was, he'd been here 3 or 4 or 5 years before he really.
Chip wanted to cut him, remember?
Yes,
he thought he was going to get cut for Travis Long.
Yeah.
Travis Long, Les.
Yeah, so Brandon, I hope Brandon is really Brandon Graham when we see him. It's possible that he won't be, but I know he put the work in. I mean, there's not going to be any doubt about that he attacked rehab and did everything he was supposed to do and more, and is in great shape and is, going to give every ounce that he has. But it is a concern, and I think it's, they went out and got Hassan Reddick for a reason. And they're probably going to address edge rusher very high in the draft as well. But I don't want to see Brandon Graham stymied by this. I want to see him play those 3 more years.
Last thing. 1 week from now, or 1 week and a night from now, Les Bowen will be where, eating what?
For the Inquirer, since 2016, I actually was covering the draft from the draft site, but obviously I'm not there anymore. I was at the Cleveland draft last year. That was the last big event I guess I did for the Inquirer. I'm going to be down at NovaCare this year with Chris Franklin and John, and we'll see what they have in the cafeteria menu that night. I don't really know.
Hopefully it's open for us. I'm excited about that, Les.
Oh yeah, it's a pretty good spread actually. Yeah.
Should be good. Les, we appreciate you coming on with us today. Check out Les at NJ.com. Still putting it out as good as anybody else. Thanks for putting it out for us today.
Well, thank you, guys. Take care.
Thanks,
That
Les.
is Les Bowen here with us on Birds 365. You know what I thought of when I saw Les's shot? Masterpiece Theater.
Yeah.
That we should have been discussing some avant-garde novel rather than are the Eagles really going to take a linebacker in the 4th round this year.
If he only had a rocking chair with a big oversized book and like an Afghan over his legs.
Yeah, he looked like he was ready to put forth an episode of Masterpiece Theater. We'll continue the masterpieces here. McDonald and McMullen, your Birds 365 guys, coming back in just